G'day, Alan. Good to be with you.
Thank you, Mark. You say in your book that Abbott has his mojo back as a policy advocate, that he's speaking for the fed-up, silent majority, the Australian larrikins and the battlers in the outer suburbs and regions, and you make the point that their vote is currently parked with Pauline Hanson. What impact has the Abbott London speech, or is the Abbott London speech of 24 hours ago likely to have on the political landscape in Australia? He's saying the government has to do something about the clean energy target and renewable energy subsidies.
Well, it's a decisive intervention, Alan, and the key word there is decisive, which is the exact opposite of Malcolm Turnbull. Turnbull's been fluffing around for 3 or 4 months now as to deciding on the number one issue facing the country in terms of energy security. Do we persevere with a ridiculous renewable energy target? Well, Abbott's knocked that right on the head, and I think people are looking for decisive leadership. Now, whether you love or hate Tony Abbott, you've got to say he's putting out policy recommendations that the Australian people desperately need. Abolish the Human Rights Commission, cut the immigration program you've been talking about this week, the total overcrowding of Sydney because of excessive population growth. And Abbott's saying get rid of the renewable energy target, get rid of the subsidies and provide energy security for the Australian people so we keep the lights on.
Mark, I have been saying that I think, and I'm not an alarmist, and I'm certainly not a pessimist, but this may be the greatest crisis we've faced since Federation, with the exception of war. You've now got an admission of the crisis, where the Turnbull government is apparently today going to announce a $36 million trial scheme to take place in New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia, where more than 10,000, so they've got into bed with AGL, more than 10,000 AGL customers will have their bills cut if they voluntarily agree to reduce power. An admission that we can't meet the electricity and power needs, yet we're the biggest exporter of energy in the world.
Well, Alan, don't feel reluctant about describing it as a crisis. We know this for a fact because last year we saw in South Australia real living proof of what happens if you go too far down the road of renewables. Jay Weatherall, the Premier of South Australia before the Paris Climate Conference, said openly he was conducting an experiment. He described it as an experiment, like Frankenstein. This is an experiment. I'm going to 50 or 60% renewable based on wind power. And we know what happened there. The wind blew too hard and the lights went out. So it's something that's proven in our own country, and I find it remarkable as people talk about the energy crisis in Australia, we don't reflect more seriously about what actually happened in one of our states just last year.
Yes, and of course then, when Hazelwood said they were closing, Abbott said it has to stay open, we need baseload power, coal-fired power, and here we are exporting our coal, the biggest exporter of coal in the world, over 1,000 coal-fired power stations being built around the world, exporting our coal to service those power stations to give other countries cheap electricity. Abbott said we must keep Hazelwood open because Abbott said yes, Turnbull said no.
Well, the other factor, of course, is nuclear.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you about that.
The left is not fair dinkum about climate change because the ultimate solution for energy security and zero carbon emissions is for Australia to develop a nuclear energy industry. Why haven't we done that? We've got the uranium in the ground, we're geologically stable, we've got the vast open spaces to deal with the waste disposal issues. Other countries are doing it. We export the uranium overseas, they turn it into nuclear power. They must be laughing at us. What sort of country would have all these resources and still struggle to keep the lights on?
Malcolm Turnbull, you say in your book, The Outsiders, that he's living in a world of delusion. And you say Turnbull is the most radically leftist and divisive Prime Minister in Australian history. And you say as these massive changes swirl around him, Turnbull's become a bit player, the political equal of a cud-chewing cow watching the passing traffic.
Well, we've got massive changes in our institutions. I mentioned earlier the Human Rights Commission. The stuff they put out is a disgrace to the nation. Look at what's happening in the university sector. Sydney University's got a program called Unlearn. Unlearn, like get rid of all that stuff that your family put in your head, the school might have put in your head, and they'll give you some neo-Marxist ideas when you go to Sydney University. You've got at Deakin University, the sponsoring of a conference where one of the speakers funded to come out from the United States is going to tell the people, don't talk to white people. That's his answer to racism, don't talk to white people. White people are supposed to be so ignorant and racist that even talking to them is bad. So Turnbull has got, in his major public institutions, publicly funded in Australia, examples of racial segregation and neo-Marxism taking hold. And he just sits there like a cow by the side of the road, chewing on his cud, watching the passing traffic. And it's pathetic. It's not leadership. He is a bystander to major damaging changes in our public institutions, and he doesn't lift a finger.
This question of population, I mean, the board here has been on fire. I wrote down as they rang the suburbs that they represented, where they said the whole character of our city, of our suburbs, is being changed, that it's virtually environmental vandalism, except in the suburbs of Wallara, Bellevue Hill and Vaucluse. Bexley, Gosford, North Sydney, Kellyville, Hornsby, Dee Why, Frenchs Forest, Canterbury, Campbelltown, Parramatta, Bardwell Park, Torella, Rockdale, Newtown, Sydenham, Bankstown, Waterloo. It's scary stuff. The same in Brisbane as you drive from the airport through to the valley, and the skyline's completely changed. And here we are. As a result of population, houses being knocked down, high-rise, it's like sort of battery hens, kids being educated now in high-rise buildings. I mean, where the hell does this end?
Well, you've summarised the divide accurately, Alan, that the big Australia advocates, the people pushing massive immigration and urban congestion, live in Wallara, Bellevue Hill and Vaucluse, and the people copping the consequences of this live in Oran Park, Narellan, Penrith, Blacktown, Parramatta, Chatswood, which is overdeveloped. So you've got massive population pressures, and it's overdue for Australia to develop an immigration program where we set the intake according to the interests of the people who live here now. We don't owe anything to the rest of the world. We decide the immigration program, and it should be determined for the interests of the Australians living here right now.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the overcrowding, it's the excessive demand that big Australia causes in the housing market. The whole housing affordability crisis is a product of too many people wanting to buy a house in Sydney. How do you solve that problem? Bring the prices back down, we'll cut the immigration level.
But you've got a New South Wales government says there are going to be 40 high-rise hotspots they call priority precincts. Mark, whose priorities?
Well, priorities of the big Australia advocates who don't live with any of these problems. I invite them to come out and drive along Camden Valley Way, as I did yesterday morning, sitting in a 30 to 40-minute traffic jam on the outskirts of Sydney, trying to head south, away from perceived problems, to the urban fringe where you think you should be able to move around freely. The congestion on the edge of Sydney now, Alan, is worse than the centre of Sydney. The city's gone upside down because of urban sprawl, and the people who are causing the problem, deciding on big Australia immigration levels, they don't see any of this. No. Let them come and sit in the traffic jams that unfortunately so many listeners are sitting in right now.